Remedy Entertainment is one of the premier developers out there right now. They're telling some of the most unique and captivating stories in gaming, but they still seem to fly under the radar. So I played every single one of their games to convince you to do the same. Remedy's first game was released in 1996, just over a year after the company was founded. What began as just a normal racing game evolved into something much more violent. You shoot at and try to blow up your opponents, complete quests, and snag cash on the track as you work your way up from the bottom. And let me tell you, I kinda rule at this game.
Yay!
For real though, I don't know if it's because I'm just bad, but my god did I have a hell of a time trying to claw my way out of last place in every single race. I felt like this guy, or this guy, every single time. It was hard as shit, but despite that, I had a fun time here. It was a solid first outing for a small company, and more surprisingly, this actually works really well on Steam. I fully expected to have to fiddle with it, but nope, it installed within seconds and I was playing it just moments later. I actually forgot what that was even like. Oh my god! Even though the small team that launched Remedy had experience in game development, they didn't have experience with writing dialogue. So Remedy called on a friend and hired an individual that would change how they make video games forever. In what is perhaps their most iconic title, Remedy dropped Max Payne in 2001 with the help of Rockstar. After the release of Death Rally, Remedy knocked around several different ideas, including a spaceflight sim, another racing game, and an isometric shooter. The only one that was greenlit was the shooter. Funding was promised only if they made it 3D and implemented a strong, recognizable player character. And I think they succeeded. But did you know Max Payne almost had a different name? That doesn't sound like a shooting game, unless you're shooting loads. Lead designer Petri Yarvielato, I'm so sorry for butchering your name, had the idea to add bullet time as a mechanic, drawing inspiration from John Woo films, shout out Hard Boiled, and of course, this is where the decision to hire Sam Lake really paid off, because not only did he drive the decision to tell this incredibly dark and gritty noir story, but they used his frickin' face, which definitely made him an instantly recognizable character right off rip.
And I'm seeing my face everywhere, kind of what was to be known as the constipated crimis.
His tragic story is just beautifully told between the comic book panels and Jane McCaffrey's narration. Shooters at the time weren't exactly known for that.
It's time to chew gas and kick bubble gum.
As an added bonus, I'm such a sucker for snowy settings, and throughout the game they mention how this is the worst snowstorm New York City has seen in a long time. And even though it looks like a thin dusting due to hardware limitations, my young developing mind imagined feet, but not in that Tarantino way. Much like Max's enemies, I was blown away when I first played this, and I am still haunted by those baby cries. So, go play it if you haven't, or don't, but I'm just gonna wait here until you do. Remedy returned to the world of pain to develop a sequel immediately following the release of Max Payne. During development of the original, Take-Two saw its potential and purchased the rights for a mere $10 million, and were like, we'll take two. I'm so sorry. And I know what you're thinking right now. If they just named him Dick Justice, he'd be worth at least double that, guaranteed. $20 million? That's a small price to pay to bring Dick Justice to the people.
I had a permanent, constipated grimace on my face.
As part of that agreement, Remedy was contractually obligated to make Max Payne duh. They had a larger budget, full creative freedom, but not a whole lot of time to get it all done. They spent 5 years developing the original and only had 2 years to crank out the sequel. They tightened up the gameplay, they changed Max Payne's face, which I am low-key still pissed about by the way. They switched to the Havoc physics engine, which provided Remedy the resources to create amazing cinematic action sequences. This game absolutely rules and sits firmly in the top 3 of all Remedy games. So why did it pull a Mahomes and flop? Still to this day I'm confused as to why this game, which is better in just about every metric, failed to surpass the original. It does exactly what a sequel needs to do by improving upon everything the original did. Graphics were great, the action sequences were unmatched at the time, and the story remains captivating. It's a shame that it didn't sell well, and the only rational explanation is the face change. I mean, come on. Exhibit A or Exhibit B? If you chose B, you're a liar. Sam Lake elected to keep it noir, but instead wanted to make it a gritty, violent love story instead of another revenge tale. Lake has always had a different approach to storytelling in games, and his ideas are prevalent among their entire catalog. But while both Max Payne's are fantastic games all around, their stories are much more straightforward than this next one. Following their work on Max Payne, it took a long 7 years to put out Alan Wake. I was a freshman in high school when Max Payne 2 came out, and of legal drinking age when Wake made his debut. What began as a ridiculously ambitious idea of an open-world survival game eventually turned into a more focused episodic action thriller. They initially wanted to get away from the linear structure we saw in Max Payne and tell this strange Stephen King and David Lynch influenced narrative. They had trouble tying these two ideas together as they wanted to keep the story on track. But the problem with open world games is it's easy to get sidetracked. I know personally, I forgot what the Dragonborn was even supposed to do by the time I picked back up with the main quest. I just kinda killed Alduin and was like, why'd I do that? So to combat those distractions, Remedy decided to eventually break the game down into smaller explorable sections to allow the player to still kinda wander around a bit, but also keep their eye on the prize. This ambition resulted in years of development hell, with the game taking 3 years in pre-production alone while Remedy attempted to nail down their ideas. But early on, they knew they had the basics, which are pretty similar to Stephen King's The Dark Half. A writer named Alan Wake would experience supernatural phenomena as his writings come to life, which then evolved into a metaphor on Remedy's work with Max Payne and their development of this game. Alan Wake's novels follow a hard-boiled cop very similar to Max Payne, named Alex Casey. He seeks to get away from that series and write something else, but struggles to do so, and goes to the town of Bright Falls in search of inspiration, and he gets hella inspired, I tell you what. Alan Wake is a strange game to me because I adore the story and all the lore sprinkled throughout, but its gameplay loop gets so repetitive over its 10 to 11 hours. While the world and the supernatural stuff is super fascinating, having to repeatedly blast shadow creatures over and over and over and over and over again with light before shooting them gets real old, much like how I feel right now. I even counted how many times this is done throughout the game. Some that have watched my channel may know already, but just take a guess. 500 shadow people? Maybe 850? No, try over 1,300 times. I don't even hate the mechanic on its own, just how many times it's used without much variety. This game is incredibly important to Remedy's history though. It taught them a lot in how to and how not to develop games, and was their first foray into transmedia storytelling. I may have triggered some right-wingers with that word. Leading up to the game, they released the Bright Falls web series, which serves as a prequel. Then there's the book titled The Alan Wake Files, which also expands the storyline outside of the game. Then littered throughout Wake's adventure are TV segments that show Ukulele in live action or episodes of the in-game television series called Night Springs. This mix of video game graphics and live action moments become a core storytelling technique for the studio moving forward. This gives them a signature style and allows them to experiment more with their actors. And regardless of its flaws, Alan Wake is a game that's definitely worth playing at least once, along with its 2 DLC episodes that add a whole lot more to the story. But they weren't done with Alan Wake yet. Just 2 years after the release of Alan Wake, Remedy dropped a shorter entry that, gameplay-wise, kinda knocks the socks off the original. If the first game played more like this one, it wouldn't have been nearly as much of a slog to get through. But what it makes up for in gameplay, it loses something in its plot. While it's still interesting, it feels a little disjointed compared to the original, but I honestly kind of dig it.
Can you dig it?
Yes, I can. It feels like a Twilight Zone episode of Alan Wake, which is exactly what Remedy was going for in the first place.
The man before you is a champion of light. He is part of a conflict between darkness and light.
This was initially planned as Alan Wake 2, but Microsoft was not interested in funding another entry in the franchise after their experience with the first game. So Remedy scaled back and created a much smaller title that launched on the Xbox Live Arcade in 2012. Despite being a roughly 3-hour-long game, American Nightmare packs a punch in terms of lore, fleshing out a villain that appears in the game but takes center stage here and will wind up becoming a more prominent character in future Remedy games. American Nightmare is fun, it's silly, it's chaotic, and it's 100% an awesome game. Remedy fell in love with Alan Wake and his world and promised it won't be the last we see of him. We just didn't know how long it was going to take at the time. Not what you expected, is it? In the early 2010s, Remedy experimented a little bit with mobile games, including a remake of Death Rally. While the main studio worked hard on their next AAA title, they had a small team develop a free-to-play tower defense game. And when you see free-to-play, you kinda already know what to expect. In truth, the game is nothing special and sorta just feels like a relatively low-effort attempt to break into the mobile market. Thankfully, this was just a phase and allowed Remedy to maintain focus on what's to come. Remedy returned to making cinematic AAA titles in 2016 with the launch of Quantum Break. Even though their dream of an Alan Wake sequel subsided when Microsoft declined to pursue it,
the sequel was not happening. The time wasn't right for that.
They were still interested in working with Remedy on a new IP. Microsoft was micro-hard for their storytelling techniques and simply wanted to partner with them again to give Xbox an exclusive they desperately needed. Remedy delivered Quantum Break, which was born from a Night Springs episode from Alan Wake whose title I cannot repeat on YouTube. Remedy dipped their toes into live-action stuff in Alan Wake and sought to expand on that in Quantum Break. And man, they took that idea and expanded on it in a massive way. They created what is effectively a video game and a TV show rolled into one package, with intermittent junction points that allow us as the player to make various decisions that impact both the game and the show. Feeding into this idea of an ever-evolving story, there are several collectibles to be found in each chapter that add to the narrative and create a kind of a butterfly effect that may change what transpires in the TV show. This idea led to them hiring on some recognizable actors. Oh shit! It's Max Payne! In reality, like a lot of these types of games, those decisions don't change the story very much. Some dialogue here and there, and maybe certain side characters experience consequences of your actions, but that's really about it. One thing I want to get across in this video is how underlooked Remedy is as a developer. The amount of effort they put into each of their games is astounding. Since the beginning, they've done their research. For Death Rally, they sped through the streets of Helsinki, shooting at each other and being full-blown degenerates to really nail that feeling down. This was a terrifying period in the mid-90s known as Helsinki on Earth. What? Then for Max Payne, they fly out to New York to explore the city extensively so they can accurately portray it in the game. And they did the same thing for Alan Wake, but out in the Pacific Northwest. Then in Quantum Break, they invented time travel. What? Nah, I wish. We could really use that right now here in the States though. Instead, they had prolonged meetings with people from the film industry to nail down their TV show portion, and they met with scientists to learn about theoretical and quantum physics. I'm already falling asleep at the idea of it, but I love that Remedy put forth that effort to tell a somewhat realistic story using time travel.
I just watched a ship fast forward through a fucking bridge.
I said somewhat, okay? This game marks the beginning of modern Remedy, with its DNA seen in their future titles. We have the creation of the Northlight engine to thank for that, which allows Remedy to craft these realistic digital representations of their actors and include some insane effects.
This is so freaking cool.
It's a shame Remedy doesn't own the rights to this game either. I hope they'll be able to purchase it from Microsoft like they did with Alan Wake, because it certainly seems like they intended to tie in past and future games. It would fit right into the Remedy connected universe, which starts with During and following Quantum Break, Remedy experienced a shift in structure. They had lofty ambitions, and in order to bring those to fruition, they had to become a multi-project studio. They experienced their fair share of long development cycles and wanted to ensure a steady trickle of games to their audience. The first is Control, released in 2019, an absolutely crazy mindbender that officially kicked off Remedy's connected universe. Heavily inspired by the SCP Foundation, Remedy elected to drop the player into the strange governmental setting that wasn't exactly open world and more of a 3D Metroidvania. Gameplay wise, this might be Remedy's most fun game yet. Anyone else remember Psyops from back on the original Xbox? I feel like that game was well ahead of its time, and that Control is what that game really wanted to be. You kind of feel like a fucking mutant from X-Men or something, but you gradually get stronger and become an absolute unit against the enemies in the game, just obliterating them with your powers and shit while you float around like a terrifying demon. Freaking love it, man. You can see a lot of Remedy's experience with Quantum Break here. They wanted players to feel like a superhero, and Control absolutely nails that feeling down. But despite feeling like a badass, this game is one of the most unsettling non-horror games I have ever played. Its utilization of the brutalist architecture within a government office, combined with this overbearing sense of dread, makes Control feel like a horror game when it's really not. The story is the most difficult one to follow though, but not as difficult as this map. What the fuck? Remedy intentionally wanted to drop us into this world, much like how the main character Jessie waltzes in and has to piece everything together herself. You can go from point A to point B and kinda get what's going on, but exploring and digging through the lore rewards you with a much deeper understanding of the universe. You start piecing together clues and find out the world of Control is much bigger than what we're experiencing in this building. It's a magnificent game, and it quickly became their most popular title since Max Payne. It being cross-platform and its inclusion in Game Pass allowed a wider audience to check it out. Remedy finally seemed to be getting their much-deserved flowers, but not with this next one. Yikes! Crossfire X or HD or whatever the crap it be is easily Remedy's biggest blunder. While it's not fully developed by them, they were hired on to develop the single-player campaign by Smilegate Entertainment, and smile we did not. Even though the original Crossfire was a massive success in China, they really fumbled the bag with the sequel. Remedy was brought on due to their proclivity in creating memorable worlds and characters, but the only memorable part of this game was how forgettable it was.
That doesn't make sense.
It would gain the title as one of the worst games of 2022, and as a result, it quickly fell off, and just 14 months after its launch, it was shut down in May of 2023. The single-player campaign isn't even available to download anymore, so even if you wanted to play it, you can't. That's okay, because Alan Wake returns. After over a decade, Remedy was finally able to return to the world of Alan Wake. Even though he appears or gets mentioned in previous titles, he gets a full-blown game that is completely unrecognizable from the original. If you put Alan Wake 1 and 2 side by side without context, you'd be hard-pressed to consider them sequels. Alan Wake 1 was an action game with horror themes. Control kinda towed that horror line as well, but they go hard in this game. Perhaps a little too hard. Stop it! This is my personal game of the year for 2023. And look, I fully recognize Baldur's Gate 3 deserves all the awards, but for me personally, as a huge horror fan, Alan Wake 2 checks all the boxes for me. It maintains the same mechanic the first game uses by shining light on enemies before they can be killed, but they scaled back the amount of enemies you deal with by making it a full-on survival horror experience that plays in a similar manner to the Resident Evil remakes. The unique atmospheres the two playable characters give each section their own personalities. Newcomer Saga Anderson explores the dark, creepy woods of the Pacific Northwest, whereas Alan explores a mind-bent version of a gritty New York City, populated by shadows constantly shouting his name, and who may or may not jump you at any given moment. It's an incredibly intricate game that impresses at every facet. The Remedy lore goes deep in this sequel, and while they do a decent job of giving you an idea of what happened beforehand, so you don't technically have to play any other Remedy game before this, it hits a whole lot harder if you've been a fan for as long as I have. While it received universal praise, the game wasn't an instant hit, and just now in 2025 it started to turn a profit for the company. That's because it was a bit handicapped, methinks. In 2019, Remedy acquired the publishing rights of Alan Wake from Microsoft, and inked a deal with Epic to release 2 games. Alan Wake Remastered was the first, and Alan Wake 2 was the second. And even though this partnership with Epic provided the funding they needed to make Alan Wake 2 what they wanted, it kinda came at a cost. Its absence from Steam impacted its sales, and the decision to go without a physical edition also hurt it some. And I know most people don't care about that, but I do, and I admit I double dipped in this bitch. It's that good. I mean, what games put you through a playable rock opera?
What the hell? From what I gathered, you grew up nice and sheltered with mama's pretty stories and your own made-up fury. And mama gave me...
If I had to say anything negative about this game, it would be the jump scares are a bit too excessive to the point you become numb to them. I also think the mind play sections are a really cool addition, but I wish that there was a way to skip the investigative parts if you want. On replay, those parts slow the game down to a crawl, so that option would have been nice. It's a kick-ass game and one of the most gorgeous video games to date. You're doing yourself a disservice if you haven't tried it out yet.
Whatever you say.
And this is just the beginning of something much bigger. Remedy seeks to do something completely new to them in 2025 with FBC Firebreak, which takes place soon after the events of Control. As of now, there's no release date, but as someone who doesn't typically play multiplayer or games as a service, I'll be there. Then somewhere on the horizon is their sequel to Control, which I have no doubt will be just as awesome as the original. And of course, I'm highly anticipating their Max Payne remakes. Hopefully we get news on all 3 of these titles soon, but if their history goes to show, we can expect all of them to be bangers. I hope this convinced you to try out some of Remedy's games if you haven't already. Their entire catalog, or at least the games that are still available, can be found on PlayStation, Xbox, or PC. In an era where some older games are made difficult to play for no reason, Remedy is making sure everything they've made is accessible. I just really love what Remedy is doing here. So much of the industry has continually shown it's only chasing dollar signs, while Remedy is out here creating awesome, unique video games and just doing it their own way. So tell me which of these games is your favorite, and let's talk all things Remedy in the comments. Thanks as always for watching. I'm King Deschain, signing off for now.